The planet Zarnath Prime was not a place for the faint of heart. Its jagged mountains pierced the sky like broken teeth, and its endless deserts stretched farther than the eye could see. The air carried a metallic tang sharp enough to make newcomers cough until their lungs adjusted. It was a world that seemed designed to kill anything foolish enough to set foot on it. Yet despite its hostility, there were those who called it home humans, stubborn and resilient, carving out a fragile existence amidst the chaos. Kael'tor stood at the edge of the human settlement, his tall, spindly frame wrapped in a sleek, silver suit that shimmered under the dim red sun. His large, almond-shaped eyes scanned the area with curiosity mixed with unease. As an alien professor from the Intergalactic Research Council, he had spent decades studying countless species across the galaxy, but nothing had prepared him for this. These humans were different. They lived on what many considered a death world. Yet they thrived, or at least survived, against all odds. The settlement itself was crude by galactic standards. Patchwork walls made of scrap metal and salvaged parts surrounded rows of makeshift buildings. Smoke curled lazily into the air from chimneys, and the sound of hammering echoed faintly in the distance. To Kael'tor, it looked more like a refugee camp than a functioning community. And yet there was a strange sense of order here, a quiet determination that radiated from every corner. At the center of it all was Ethan Cole. Kael'tor had been observing him since his arrival 2 days ago. Ethan was a man in his mid-30s, with short brown hair streaked with gray and a face lined by years of hardship. His body bore the scars of countless battles, but his movements were deliberate and precise. He carried himself with authority, though he rarely raised his voice. The other humans respected him, even revered him, and Kael'tor wanted to know why. Today, Ethan was leading a small patrol outside the settlement's perimeter. Kael'tor followed discreetly, careful not to interfere. The group consisted of 5 humans, all armed with a mix of primitive weapons and scavenged alien tech. Their mission was simple: scout the surrounding area for signs of danger and gather any useful materials they might find. Simple tasks, perhaps, but Kael'tor knew better than to underestimate the risks. This planet was teeming with predators, each one more deadly than the last. As they moved through the rocky terrain, Kael'tor marveled at how effortlessly the humans navigated the treacherous landscape. Their boots crunched over loose gravel, and their heads swiveled constantly, scanning for threats. Despite their lack of advanced equipment, they moved with confidence, trusting their instincts and each other. Kael'tor noted this with fascination. Most species would have faltered under such conditions, but these humans seemed almost comfortable in the chaos. It wasn't long before trouble found them. A low growl rumbled through the air, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps shaking the ground. From behind a cluster of boulders emerged a pack of Vorthax, reptilian creatures with razor-sharp claws and glowing yellow eyes. They were fast, vicious, and relentless, perfect killing machines adapted to this harsh environment. "Stay calm," Ethan said, his voice steady as he raised his weapon. "We've dealt with worse." Kael'tor watched in awe as the humans reacted, instantly forming a tight, defensive circle. There was no panic, no hesitation. Each member of the team knew their role, moving with practiced precision. One of them tossed a smoke grenade, enveloping the area in thick gray clouds. The Vorthax hesitated, momentarily confused by the sudden loss of visibility. That was when Ethan struck. With quick, calculated movements, he set off a series of traps, hidden along the path. Explosions erupted around the Vorthax, sending chunks of rock flying and scattering the creatures. Those that managed to close the distance were met with bursts of gunfire and well-placed melee strikes. Within minutes, the threat was neutralized. Kael'tor stared in disbelief. What he had just witnessed defied everything he thought he knew about combat. The humans hadn't relied on superior firepower or overwhelming numbers. Instead, they had used their surroundings to their advantage, turning the environment itself into a weapon. It was brilliant and terrifying. When the dust settled, Ethan turned to his team. "Good work, everyone. Let's grab what we can and head back before reinforcements show up." His tone was casual, as if fending off a pack of apex predators was just another day on the job. Kael'tor approached cautiously, unsure of how to process what he had seen. "Ethan," he began, his voice tinged with both admiration and confusion. "What you did, it was extraordinary. How did you anticipate their movements so accurately?" Ethan shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. "You don't survive long on Zarnath Prime without learning a few tricks. Out here, brute force only. Gets you so far. Sometimes you gotta think smarter, not harder." The simplicity of Ethan's explanation struck Kael'tor. Back on his homeworld, military strategies were often complex and reliant on cutting-edge technology. Here, survival depended on creativity and adaptability. It was a lesson Kael'tor hadn't expected to learn, but one he couldn't ignore. Over. The next hour, Kael'tor accompanied the team as they collected resources and secured the area. He asked questions whenever he could, trying to piece together the puzzle that was human ingenuity. Ethan answered patiently, sharing stories of past encounters and explaining the logic behind his decisions. Each answer deepened Kael'tor's respect for these Deathworlders. By the time they returned to the settlement, Kael'tor's mind was racing. He had come to Zarnath Prime seeking answers about human resilience, but he had found something far greater: inspiration. These humans weren't just surviving. They were thriving in a way that challenged conventional wisdom. And as Kael'tor looked at Ethan, he realized that this soldier embodied everything remarkable about humanity. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the settlement in shadow. Kael'tor retreated to his quarters, still processing the events of the day. He pulled out his datapad and began typing notes, determined to document every detail. For the first time in his career, he felt truly humbled and eager to learn more. Unbeknownst to him, the lessons were only beginning. The next morning came quickly, and Kael'tor woke before the sun had fully risen. He was still thinking about the events of the previous day, the Vorthax ambush, Ethan's clever traps, and the way the humans worked together so smoothly. It was all so different from what he had studied in books or observed on other planets. These humans weren't just surviving. They were thriving in a place that should have killed them long ago. Kael'tor wanted to understand how they did it. More than that, he wanted to see it happen again. After a quick breakfast of nutrient paste, Kael'tor made his way to the center of the settlement. Ethan was already there, checking his weapon and talking with a few members of his team. The human glanced up as Kael'tor approached, raising an eyebrow. "Something on your mind, Professor?" Ethan asked, his tone casual but curious. Kael'tor hesitated for a moment, unsure how to phrase his request. I would like to accompany you on your next mission," he said finally, his voice tinged with both excitement and nervousness. "Your tactics are fascinating, and I believe there is much to learn from them." Ethan looked surprised for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You sure about that? These trips can get rough. Not exactly safe for someone who spends most of their time in a lab." "I am aware of the risks," Kael'tor replied firmly. "But if I am to truly understand your methods, I must observe them firsthand. Please allow me to join you." Ethan studied the alien for a moment, then shrugged. "All right, but don't say I didn't warn you. Stick close, follow orders, and try not to get yourself killed." "Deal?" "Deal," Tur agreed, relief washing over him. An hour later, the group set out. This time, their destination was an old supply depot located several miles from the settlement. According to Ethan, it might contain valuable resources, spare parts, fuel cells, maybe even food rations. But getting there wouldn't be easy. The route passed through territory controlled by scavengers, ruthless groups of humans and aliens who preyed on anyone foolish enough to wander too far from safety. As they moved, Kael'tor struggled to keep pace with the others. His suit, designed for comfort rather than mobility, restricted his movements, and the uneven terrain proved challenging for his long legs. Still, he pressed on, determined not to slow the group down. Ethan occasionally glanced back to check on him, offering a few words of encouragement when needed. It wasn't long before trouble found them. As they rounded a rocky outcrop, a hail of gunfire erupted from above. A group of scavengers had taken up position on a nearby ridge, their weapons trained on the patrol. They shouted demands, ordering the group to drop their gear and surrender. Ethan immediately signaled for everyone to take cover behind a cluster of boulders. "Stay low," he barked, his voice calm but commanding. "We're outnumbered, but we've got the high ground working against them. Let's use it." Kael'tor crouched beside Ethan, his heart pounding. He had never been in a firefight before, and the sound of bullets whizzing past his head was terrifying. "What do we do now?" he whispered, his large eyes wide with fear. Ethan gave him a reassuring nod. "Leave this to me. Just stay behind cover and let me work." With that, Ethan sprang into action. He reached into his pack and pulled out a handful of smoke bombs, tossing them toward the scavengers' position. Thick clouds of gray smoke billowed into the air, obscuring their view. The scavengers began firing blindly into the haze, wasting ammunition and creating chaos among their ranks. Next, Ethan grabbed a handheld communicator from his belt. Adjusting the frequency, he mimicked the scavengers' voices, shouting commands that contradicted each other. "Fall back." "No, hold your ground. Take the left flank." The confused scavengers turned on each other, unsure who was giving orders. Some began shooting at their own comrades, while others retreated in disarray. Kael'tor watched in stunned silence as Ethan orchestrated the entire scene like a conductor leading an orchestra. Within minutes, the scavengers had neutralized themselves, leaving only a few stragglers to deal with. Ethan motioned for his team to move forward, picking off the remaining enemies with precise shots. When the dust settled, the area was eerily quiet. Ethan stood up, brushing dirt from his clothes. "All right, let's grab what we came for and get out of here," he said, gesturing toward the depot. Kael'tor rose shakily to his feet, his mind reeling. That was incredible," he stammered. "How did you know exactly what to do?" Ethan smirked. "Years of practice. You learn pretty quick out here that brains beat brawn 9 times out of 10. Plus, knowing how people think gives you an edge." Those scavengers were amateurs. They fell apart the second things got messy. The rest of the mission went smoothly. The group reached the depot without further incident and loaded up on supplies. Kael'tor helped carry a few crates, his earlier fear replaced by a growing sense of admiration for Ethan and his team. By the time they returned to the settlement, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Back at the camp, Kael'tor sought out Ethan once more. "I need to thank you," he said earnestly. "Today I learned something invaluable, not just about combat, but about survival itself. Your ability to adapt and innovate is remarkable." Ethan chuckled softly. "Don't mention it. Like I said, it's all about staying alive. Out here, you either figure things out or you don't make it. Simple as that." Kael'tor nodded thoughtfully. "Still, I underestimated you and your people. Humans are far more resourceful than I imagined. There is so much to learn from you." Ethan leaned back against a crate, crossing his arms. "Well, if you're serious about learning, stick around. We've got plenty more days like today ahead of us. Just remember, no amount of studying will prepare you for the real thing. Experience is the best teacher." Over the next few hours, Kael'tor documented everything he had witnessed, filling page after page with notes and sketches. He wrote about the scavenger ambush, detailing Ethan's use of smoke bombs and psychological manipulation. He described the way the humans worked together seamlessly, each member playing a vital role in the operation. And he reflected on the broader implications of what he had seen, that intelligence and ingenuity could triumph over sheer power. As night fell, Kael'tor sat outside his quarters staring up at the stars. For the first time in his life, he felt a deep sense of humility. These humans, living on a planet that should have crushed them, had shown him a new way of thinking. They weren't just survivors. They were innovators, constantly adapting to overcome impossible odds, and Ethan Cole was the embodiment of that spirit. A man who faced death daily yet never lost sight of the bigger picture. Kael'tor knew he had much more to learn, but he also knew one thing for certain. His perspective on the universe had changed forever. Later that evening, Kael'tor couldn't help but replay the day's events in his mind. He thought about the scavengers' confusion, the precision of Ethan's tactics, and the way the humans trusted each other completely. It was clear that their strength lay not in individual skill but in their ability to work as a unit. Every decision Ethan made seemed calculated, every move deliberate. Yet, there was also an element of unpredictability, a willingness to take risks and improvise when necessary. Kael'tor realized that this was what made humans so unique. They didn't rely solely on logic or technology. Instead, they blended creativity, intuition, and teamwork to achieve results that seemed almost miraculous. It was a lesson Kael'tor knew he would carry with him for the rest of his life. As he prepared for bed, Kael'tor decided to write a letter to the Intergalactic Research Council. He wanted to share his observations, to explain why studying humanity was so important. But more than that, he wanted to convince them that these Deathworlders had something to teach the galaxy, a new way of thinking, a new way of surviving. Now, though, Kael'tor was content to simply observe and learn. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, and perhaps even new surprises. And Kael'tor was ready for all of it. The days that followed were a blur of activity for Kael'tor. He spent most of his time observing Ethan and the other humans, trying to absorb as much as he could about their way of life. Every patrol, every skirmish, and every moment of quiet planning taught him something new. But despite all he had learned, Kael'tor couldn't shake the feeling that he was still missing something important. There was a depth to these humans, a resilience that went beyond tactics and strategy. It was as if they carried the weight of their harsh world on their shoulders and used it to fuel their determination. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan called a meeting in the center of the settlement. The humans gathered around a large table made from salvaged metal, their faces tense with worry. Kael'tor stood quietly at the edge of the group, listening intently. Ethan unfolded a map of the surrounding area and pointed to a cluster of red marks near the settlement's perimeter. "We've got a problem," Ethan began, his voice low but firm. "Scouts spotted signs of a Screebler swarm moving this way. They're fast, they're aggressive, and they'll tear through anything in their path. If we don't prepare now, we're not going to make it." A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. Kael'tor felt his stomach tighten. He had read about Screeblers in his research. They were insectoid creatures with razor-sharp mandibles and an insatiable hunger. Entire settlements had been wiped out by their swarms, leaving nothing but rubble behind. Even with Ethan's ingenuity, how could they possibly stand against such overwhelming odds? Ethan didn't waste time dwelling on fear. "We know what we're up against, so let's focus on what we can do. We'll fortify the walls, set traps along their likely routes, and create fallback positions inside the settlement. Everyone has a role to play, and I need you all to stay sharp. This isn't just about survival, it's about protecting each other." Kael'tor watched as the humans sprang into action. Some began reinforcing the walls with scrap metal and barbed wire, while others hauled crates of explosives and ammunition to strategic points. Ethan moved among them, offering guidance and encouragement. His calm demeanor seemed to steady the nerves of those around him, even as the threat loomed closer. As the night wore on, Kael'tor found himself working alongside the humans. Though his body wasn't built for heavy labor, he did what he could, carrying tools, organizing supplies, and helping patch weak spots in the defenses. The humans welcomed his efforts, treating him as one of their own despite his alien appearance. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Kael'tor. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged somewhere. By dawn, the settlement was as prepared as it could be. Barricades lined the perimeter, rigged with explosives and tripwires. Smoke bombs were placed at key locations to obscure visibility, and makeshift flamethrowers stood ready to repel any invaders. Ethan gave a final inspection, nodding in approval before addressing the group once more. "They'll hit us hard and fast," he said, his voice steady. "But we've got surprises waiting for them. Stick to your posts, trust your teammates, and remember, no matter what happens, we hold the line." Kael'tor positioned himself near Ethan, unsure of where else to go. The human glanced at him and offered a reassuring smile. "You'll be fine," Ethan said. "Just stay close and follow my lead." The attack came sooner than expected. A deafening roar echoed across the desert as the Scribbler swarm descended upon the settlement. Thousands of chitinous bodies surged forward, their clicking mandibles gleaming in the sunlight. The humans opened fire immediately, unleashing a barrage of bullets and energy blasts. The air filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning exoskeletons. Kael'tor froze, overwhelmed by the chaos. His instincts screamed at him to run, but Ethan grabbed his arm and pulled him behind cover. "Focus!" Ethan shouted over the din. "You wanted to see how this works? Now's your chance." Taking a deep breath, Kael'tor forced himself to concentrate. He watched as Ethan coordinated the defense, barking orders and adjusting tactics on the fly. The traps they had set worked perfectly, sending waves of Scribblers into fiery explosions or tumbling into hidden pits. But the creatures kept coming, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm the defenders. At one point, the main gate buckled under the pressure of the swarm. Panic spread among the humans as the barrier groaned and cracked. Ethan stepped forward. Without hesitation, "I'll hold them off," he said, grabbing a bundle of explosives. "Get everyone to the fallback position." "No," Kael'tor protested, his voice trembling. "You can't sacrifice yourself." "It's not a sacrifice," Ethan replied firmly. "It's part of the plan? Trust me." Before Kael'tor could argue further, Ethan sprinted toward the gate, dodging Scribblers as he went. Reaching the breach, he planted the explosives and activated the detonator. The resulting explosion sent a shockwave through the area, sealing the gap and buying precious time for the others to retreat. Kael'tor stared in horror as Ethan disappeared into the smoke and flames. Tears welled up in his large eyes, blurring his vision. He had never felt such raw emotion before. Grief, admiration, and guilt all rolled into one. These humans, these Deathworlders, were willing to give everything to protect their home. And now, because of him, Ethan might be gone forever. The battle raged on, but Kael'tor barely noticed. He followed the others to the fallback position, his mind consumed by thoughts of Ethan. How could someone so brave, so selfless, vanish in an instant? It didn't seem fair. Humans weren't perfect. They were flawed, vulnerable, and fragile, but they possessed a strength that transcended physical limitations. They fought not just for themselves, but for each other. Hours later, the swarm finally retreated, driven back by the relentless defense of the humans. Exhausted and battered, the survivors regrouped in the settlement's central square. Kael'tor scanned the crowd, searching desperately for any sign of Ethan. His heart sank when he saw no trace of the human leader. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was Ethan, limping slightly but alive. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, but his eyes burned with determination. The humans erupted into cheers, rushing to embrace him. Kael'tor stood frozen, unable to move or speak. Ethan spotted the alien and walked over, his expression softening. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he joked, though his voice was weary. I thought you were dead," Kael'tor stammered, his voice breaking. "Why would you risk your life like that?" Ethan shrugged. "Because it was the right thing to do. Out here, sometimes you have to put yourself on the line to keep others safe. That's what being part of a team means." Kael'tor shook his head, struggling to process the answer. In his culture, individual achievement was prized above all else. Sacrificing oneself for the greater good was almost unheard of. Yet here, among these humans, it was simply part of who they were. Over the next few days, Kael'tor reflected deeply on what he had witnessed. The battle against the Scribblers had been brutal and costly, but it had also revealed the true nature of humanity. These people didn't fight out of greed or ambition. They fought to protect what mattered most: their families, their friends, their home. Their strength wasn't just in their tactics or technology. It was in their hearts. As the settlement began to rebuild, Kael'tor decided to document everything he had seen. He wrote about the battle, describing Ethan's leadership, and the sacrifices made by the humans. He noted how teamwork and trust had been the key to their survival, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And he pondered the implications of what he had learned, not just for his own species, but for the galaxy as a whole. One evening, as he sat outside his quarters, Kael'tor looked up at the stars. They seemed brighter tonight, twinkling like tiny beacons of hope. He realized that humanity's story was far from unique. Across the universe, countless species faced challenges and hardships, striving to carve out a place for themselves in an unforgiving cosmos. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was something special about humans. Their ability to adapt, innovate, and care for one another set them apart, a shining example of what it meant to truly live. Kael'thor knew his journey was far from over. There was still so much to learn, so many questions left unanswered. But for now, he was content to simply observe and marvel at the resilience of these remarkable beings. And as he drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in his mind. Maybe the galaxy had more to gain from humanity than anyone had ever imagined. Days turned into weeks, and life in the settlement slowly returned to normal. The scars of the battle remained visible, but the humans pressed on, determined to rebuild and grow stronger. Kael'thor continued to shadow Ethan, learning everything he could about human ingenuity and perseverance. Each day brought new lessons, new insights, and new reasons to admire this extraordinary species. But Kael'thor also began to notice something else, a change within himself. He no longer viewed humans as mere subjects of study. They had become his friends, his teachers, and in some ways his family. The experiences he shared with them had reshaped his understanding of the universe, challenging long-held beliefs and opening his mind to new possibilities. As he prepared for bed one night, Kael'thor made a silent promise to himself. When he returned to his homeworld, he would share what he had learned not just with the Intergalactic Research Council, but with anyone who would listen. Humanity's story. Kael'thor stood at the edge of the settlement, staring out at the barren landscape of Zarnath Prime. The scars of the recent battle were still fresh in his mind, the chaos, the sacrifices, and Ethan's unwavering bravery. He had spent countless hours documenting everything he had witnessed, filling page after page with notes and reflections. But no matter how many words he wrote, they never seemed enough to capture the depth of what he had experienced. The alien professor knew it was time to leave. His mission on Zarnath Prime had come to an end, but the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. Before departing, he wanted to thank Ethan one last time. He found the human leader repairing a section of the settlement's wall, his hands calloused and streaked with grease. "Ethan," Kael'thor began, his voice soft but sincere, "I cannot express how much I have learned from you and your people. You have changed the way I see the universe." Ethan paused his work and looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Glad to hear it," he said with a faint smile. "But you're the one who did the learning. All I did was show you what we do to survive. It is more than that," Kael'thor insisted. "You have taught me about courage, teamwork, and the power of innovation. These are lessons my species needs to hear." Ethan chuckled softly. "Well, if you think it's worth sharing, then go for it. Just don't make us sound too perfect. We've got plenty of flaws, trust me." Kael'thor nodded, taking the comment to heart. He knew Ethan was right. Humans weren't infallible. Their mistakes and struggles were as much a part of their story as their triumphs. But that was what made them relatable, even inspiring. They didn't give up, no matter how hard things got. As Kael'thor packed his belongings, he thought about the challenges ahead. Back on his homeworld, he would face skepticism from his peers. Many would dismiss his findings as exaggerated or irrelevant. But Kael'thor was determined to prove them wrong. He owed it to Ethan and the humans of Zarnath Prime to share their story with honesty and conviction. Before boarding his ship, Kael'thor turned to take one final look at the settlement. The humans were already hard at work, rebuilding and preparing for whatever came next. Their resilience was a testament to the strength of their spirit, a spirit Kael'thor now carried within himself. As the ship lifted off, Kael'thor felt a mix of emotions, gratitude, determination, and a hint of sadness. He knew he might never return to Zarnath Prime, but its impact on him would last a lifetime. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to adapt, to persevere, and to find hope in the face of adversity. The stars stretched endlessly before him, each one a reminder of the vastness of the universe. And somewhere among them, Kael'tor realized humanity's influence was growing. It wasn't through technology or conquest, but through the simple yet profound act of surviving and thriving against all odds. With renewed purpose, Kael'tor set his course for home. He had a story to tell, and he was ready to share it with the galaxy. Months had passed since Kael'tor returned to his homeworld. The journey back had given him time to organize his thoughts and prepare for the challenges ahead. He knew his findings about humanity would face resistance, but he was ready, armed. With detailed notes, recordings, and simulations, he stepped into the grand hall of the Intergalactic Research Council, a place where the brightest minds gathered to discuss the mysteries of the universe. The room was filled with aliens from dozens of species, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. Kael'tor stood at the center of the stage, his heart pounding, but his resolve firm. As he began his presentation, he could feel the skepticism in the air. Many of the council members exchanged doubtful glances, their expressions suggesting they expected yet another dry report on primitive species, but Kael'tor wasn't there to bore them. He started by recounting the battle against the Scribblers, the overwhelming odds, the clever traps, and Ethan's ultimate sacrifice to save his team. He showed footage of the humans working together, their movements precise and their trust unshakable. Then he demonstrated how Ethan's tactics could be applied to modern conflicts, using simulations to highlight their effectiveness. At first, the audience was silent, unsure how to react. But as Kael'tor spoke, something shifted. The council. Members leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. When he finished, the room erupted into murmurs of disbelief and admiration. Some questioned whether such strategies could truly work, while others were eager to test them in their own military programs. Kael'tor's report sparked a wave of interest across the galaxy. Military leaders studied his findings, incorporating human tactics into their training regimens. Scientists wrote papers analyzing the psychological and social dynamics that made humanity so resilient. Slowly but surely, the lessons of Zarnath Prime spread, challenging long-held beliefs about strength and intelligence. Back on Zarnath Prime, life continued much as it always had. Ethan and his team faced new threats, but they remained steadfast, adapting as they always did. News of Ethan's heroism reached even their remote corner of the galaxy, earning him recognition as one of the most innovative tacticians in recorded history. Though humble about the attention, Ethan accepted it gracefully, knowing it might inspire others to think differently. For Kael'tor, the experience changed everything. He dedicated his life to bridging the gap between humanity and other civilizations. His writings became widely read, praised for their insight and clarity. He traveled often, sharing stories of Zarnath Prime and advocating for greater collaboration among species. The galaxy was vast and full of differences, but Kael'tor believed that understanding and respect could unite even the most unlikely allies. One evening, as he gazed up at the stars, Kael'tor reflected on how far he had come. A simple human soldier on a harsh planet had opened his eyes to new possibilities. It wasn't just about survival, it was about finding strength in creativity, courage in teamwork, and hope in adversity. In that moment, Kael'tor felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The universe was still full of mysteries, but he now approached them with a newfound perspective. Humanity had taught him that progress wasn't about perfection. It was about learning, growing, and never giving up. And as long as there were stars to explore, Kael'tor knew his journey was far from over.